Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, you want to chair this? Let's just decide before we go.
Yeah, go ahead. You open while I find my vice president.
We're good to go, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll call this joint meeting of the Rules Committees of the House and Senate to order. On behalf of myself and Chairman Dockstader, I appreciate all those being present. For the members of the public, there's 5 members on the Senate Rules Committee, 13 on the House side, and we also have our respective secretaries here, Ms. Parks and Ms. Landry, joining us. There'll also be our chief clerks and some of our LSO staff that will be off camera. So I think we have a couple rules to consider as additions to our temporary rules. President Dockstader, do you have any comments?
No, let's see.
All right, so at this time, we'll, I think probably the order of business is that we anticipate moving forward with the joint rules as adopted as temporary rules, unless there are amendments. So are there any amendments to the joint rules that anybody would like considered? Any amendments to the joint rules?
Mr. Speaker, point of order really quick.
Please, Representative Gray.
Should we do a roll call or are we just going to dispense with that? I mean, just to.
Yeah, that's fine. That's probably a good idea. We'll do the House roll call followed by the Senate roll call. Very good. Thank you, Representative Gray. Secretary Landry, would you call the roll for the House?
Yes. Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Connolly.
Here.
Representative Gray.
Here.
Representative Greer.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Representative Olson.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Here.
Representative Washut.
Here.
Representative Wilson.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Representative Swanitzer.
Here.
And Speaker Barlow.
Here.
13 present.
Go ahead at your convenience, Ms. Parks.
Senator Driscoll.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Senator Grew is trying to enter right now, so he will be here shortly and has not gotten through the link yet.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Co-Chairman Dockstader.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you very much. So President Dockstader, that before myself getting out of order, or maybe we should have Director Obrecht give us a thumbnail of how we should be proceeding.
Go ahead, Director.
Chairman and members of the Senate and House Rules Committee, I think Chairman Barlow covered it correctly. Right now, your task under Joint Rule 11-3 is to meet to make recommendations to your full bodies for adoption of the joint rules of the Senate and House for the 66th legislature. On January 12th, you adopted the rules of the 65th legislature as amended by Joint Rule 23-1 as the temporary joint rules for the 66th. So, Mr. Chairman, that'll be the vote next Monday is what joint rules to adopt. And I think there's at least 2 proposed joint rules for your consideration today, two amendments to the joint rules.
So thank you. So it seems like maybe we should, if we had a motion to adopt the rules rules of the 65th as amended as our base rules, and then take amendments on top of that. That seems like a prudent way to go. President Dockstader, would you agree?
Yes, proceed, please. Need a motion for that now, so move.
I think that's appropriate. So the motion is to, and a second by Representative Greer, Dockstader Greer, to adopt the rules of the temporary rules of the 66th as were adopted on the 12th of January as the permanent rules. Are there any amendments to those rules? Are there any amendments to the rules?
Would this be appropriate time that we bring our amendments in that we had made, that we had suggested in our previous meeting? Director Obrecht, is that proper?
Yep. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we've got that proposed amendment and one other proposed amendment from a House member. So however, whatever order you want to take those in.
Let's do this. Let's take our, Mr. President, if we could, let's take our House members amendment in so that he can go on with his day. We're stuck here either way. So he can get off and have lunch and then come back and convene with us. So if that would be okay with you, President Dockstader?
Please proceed.
So members, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, is there any way to put those rules up on the screen?
Right.
I don't know who's managing our system. All the rules that were up for consideration were emailed to everybody. So you should be able to pull it up on your email.
Floor Leader Driscoll said they were also emailed out.
They were emailed. I have one. It's from Representative Wharf, I believe, and then the one that came out of the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, I have it up on my screen if you'd like me to try to share, or I don't know if LSO has it and if they would like to share it.
Mr. Chairman, this is Anthony. I unfortunately do not have a copy of that rule to share on the screen.
Okay.
Anthony, Mr. Speaker, if Anthony could make either me or Representative Brown a host, we could share it on our screens.
That'd be a good idea because I'm not technologically savvy enough to do it. If you can do it on a flip phone, I can do it. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Representative Brown or Yen, you should be good to go now.
All right. Thank you very much. Representative Wharf, you have the floor for the presentation of your proposed rule. Representative Wharf.
I probably better unmute myself. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Chairman Barlow. What you can see, joint rule, I guess I'd like to move joint rule 1-3. It's pretty simple. It's adding to the definition of the controlling law. It just says 1-3, says no rule established in the joint rules or otherwise established by the House or by House of the legislature shall be enforced or interpreted in any manner that is inconsistent with the United States Constitution or the Wyoming Constitution. And I bring this forward just because I think with today's political climate, I think it's very imperative that we as a legislative body, that we continue to tell the folks that we're representing that we do hold to these documents, that they are very near and dear, and that we are not going to do anything that is counter them. And I think with the stuff that's going on in today's climate, I think it's just imperative that we make sure that we state the obvious. I think this is really an easy rule, but it's simple, and I'll just leave it any discussion that the body has. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Representative Wharf. Does any of the members have a question for Representative Wharf? And while Representative Wharf moved it, it's actually not, he does not have that authority.
Oh,
it's members of the committee, which is fine. It's not a problem. But any questions for Representative Wharf? Questions for Representative Wharf? Comments? Questions for Representative Wharf?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess my question is I don't understand why we feel this is important. We already are sworn to an oath to both constitutions. And really, you never know whether anything is completely constitutional, I guess, till a court of law tells you it is or isn't. So I guess my question would be, I have a question to Matt Obrick in that as we create rules, and aren't we cognizant of the constitutions? I mean, that's a question I would have for Matt. Is I assume when we draft these, we always look at the Constitution, but that is a question I would have of Matt.
Let's get another question, and then we'll Representative Wilson or comments, or Representative Wharf for the director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess the question I have, and I've pulled out my joint rules here, and I see rules 10.1 and 10.2. By the way, can you hear me okay? I've taken off my headphones.
Yes.
Okay. So 10.1 says, the Wyoming Manual of Legislative Procedures shall govern procedural matters, I'm just ... not inconsistent with those found in the Wyoming Constitution. And then 10.2 says, all relations between the houses which are not covered by these rules, the Wyoming statutes and constitutions, or the above manual shall be governed by Masons. So I guess, I was kind of surprised to even find that in there. So Representative Wharf, what do you see is the addition of this proposed 1.3? Just the interpretation or the insertion of the United States Constitution, or just the location of it, or what are you thinking?
All right, so we'll let Matt Obrick maybe respond to Representative Summers' question first, if he's would like to do so, and then we'll give Representative Wharf, just so he can look up that citation, give him some time. Director Obrick.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, you're right that the Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution, and the federal Constitution are the two supreme authorities on anything that the Wyoming legislature undertakes. So no rule could ever be interpreted as to trump a constitutional provision that's on point.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Wharf, would you like to respond to Chairman Wilson's question? Thank you.
Co-Chair Barlow, yes, I would. And I'd just say, I think this just is to add clarity, and it reaffirms, restates, we have all taken an oath, but it's nowhere in the rules that it says that we're bound by that oath. And I just think that this is one of those things, it just reaffirms the fact that we've all taken that oath and we've all agreed. And I'm surprised that it's not already in the rule. You can say that it's already clear, but I just think there's enough questions right now that it doesn't hurt. We can probably say this a dozen times and it's not going to be too many times. But I just think it's important enough. That's why I brought it forward. I agree. It doesn't change anything. All it does is it reasserts the fact that those two documents are the supreme law of the land. And that's why I wanted them to be put in the rules.
Thank you. Chairman Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just draw everybody's attention to principle number 10 that govern the procedures of group decision making is adopted and incorporated throughout Masons, which does say for any action to be valid, it has to comply with applicable provisions, local, federal, state law, and by the constitutions and charters. So I think it's covered.
You mentioned a reference there. What was that reference in, Chairman Greer?
It's 10-2.
So, Mr. Speaker, it's actually in Masons itself, and it's the 10 principles found on page 3 of Masons.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure what document you were reading from. Representative Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I mean, there's I guess a couple of things. I do think this is covered in a lot of different ways. It just depends on, how you want to look at it. And I think Director Obrecht really summarized it really well from a legal standpoint. It's not possible for a rule of the legislature to trump the United States Constitution. I think what's really interesting to me about the rule, the way it's written, is that it says that no rule shall be enforced or interpreted in any manner that is inconsistent with the United States Constitution. So even from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure how we would ever enforce this rule. You know, every representative, I see this all the time, and I'm sure the good senators probably even see it, but in our bodies, it's not uncommon for a person to go on record stating what their opinion is of a law in terms of how the Constitution would be interpreted. And so then this rule would say that if in fact a legislator gave an opinion that was of a rule being interpreted, but was unconstitutional, that they'd be violating our rules. And I guess that's kind of confusing to me. I'm not sure how we would ever enforce this. And then just going back to Mason's, section 73, and I may have an old version, but I found this interesting in Mason's on section 73 of, and I'm under the principles of parliamentary law, so I think this is where Representative Greer was speaking to. It actually says, while the people of a state have vested in them sovereign authority, their representatives in the legislature have only such authority as is delegated to them by the Constitution. So, I mean, we take an oath. Mason's is very clear that we can't step outside the Constitution. I think constitutional law as a whole, the simple principle that the Constitution trumps a law trumps a rule. The rule is at the very bottom of that list. I think it's a little superfluous, I guess, but my bigger concern would be enforcement, and maybe the bringer could speak to enforcement. That might help me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I think the rule we're talking about here is actually, it is stated in the Constitution. How we govern ourselves is a constitutional thing. So I think I've had the discussion with the director that actually the rules do trump statute, or could trump statute. You could make that assertion. So as it comes to the way we do our business, not agency rules, but legislative, the rules of our bodies. Representative Wilson, I see your hand is up, and then Representative Yin.
I'm sorry, I just neglected to take it down. Beg your pardon.
All right, thank you. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to belabor too much, but there are many sections in Mason's that basically outline what Representative Olson said. So if we talk about Chapter 1, Section 4, we talk about Chapter 2, Section 6, Section 7, all of it basically says the same thing, which is that our authority is delegated from the constitutions, both of them, and we can't do anything outside of that in our rules anyways. So I don't see a rule to repeat what is repeated many other times. So I wonder what the purpose of adding a new joint rule to a packet of 90 pages of rules, if it's really necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Gray. You have any questions? We're kind of on questions and general comments. So if Representative Wharf is with us. If you have any questions for him, that'd be great as well.
No, I have a general comment, but that's okay. I'll talk later. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Any other questions for Representative Wharf? Representative Wharf, would you like to respond to any of the questions from the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, I would just say, we shouldn't have to go back. We shouldn't have to refer back to the Mason's manual. I think it should be very clear, and that's all I'm doing is putting it in the rules where it's clearly stated. And as far as the language where it says enforced or interpreted, that's what LSO came up with. I'm just putting forward that language to you. But I still think you can't say this enough times with the current political climate. I think it's absolutely essential that we reaffirm as much as we can that we are going to abide and follow the U.S. and the Wyoming Constitution. So with that's really the purpose of me bringing this forward, and I'll leave it to this body to decide how they want to move forward.
Thank you, Representative Wharf. All right. Chairman Dockstetter, did you want to weigh in anything on here, or should we ask for the pleasure of the joint committee. I think you're on mute, Mr. President.
There we go. Okay. All right. Thank you. I think I see where the sponsor is coming from, but at this point, I'm not convinced that it assists us any way in emphasizing what we already know and what our responsibility is. But I do appreciate what he's trying to do here. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure that I'll be with it, but I'm just one vote on the Senate side if my other leadership would like to comment.
Okay, so maybe what we'll do, procedurally, I think we'll just ask what's the pleasure of the committee. And I think the way we're operating right now is any member of the committee, House or Senate Rules Committee, can make a motion and be seconded by any other member. I just want to affirm that would be acceptable for the president. And then we'll proceed from there, just like if it was a motion by a joint body. Director Obrecht, is that appropriate?
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much. The rule just went down. So members, what's your pleasure with the proposed rule before us 1-3? Members, what's your pleasure?
I move the rule change, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Gray. Motion by Representative Gray. It's been moved by Representative Gray. I see a second by Representative Jennings. All right, we're on the rule. Discussion on the rule. Discussion on the rule. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I encourage an aye vote on this. I do agree that it is probably it is said in other places. And I do agree with that. I talked with the bringer on this when he brought it to my attention before he was going to bring it. I told him I thought that argument would probably be the main one that was brought against it. And I understand that argument, but I repeat things all the time that are important. I mean, I had something we had to get done at the office the other day. I'm down here in Cheyenne. I repeated it 4 or 5 times in different ways because it really needed to get done. And just like you repeat things that are very important, and this is very important. And so you got Rules Committee has always got to use discretion. The body's got to use discretion on when is something becoming so voluminous that because you've repeated yourself so many times. But I don't think this one is beyond the pale. So I'd urge an aye vote on this. Thank you.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I apologize for my tardiness. I was stuck in some cyber place of my own making, and I couldn't get out of it, but I'm happy to be with you. And I got to hear the tail end of this. I didn't quite understand and didn't want to belabor it, but this political climate we are in was mentioned a couple of times. I don't know what that means exactly, but I do know what my oath meant, and I took it freely without reservation. I remember that. And it was to uphold the Constitution. I feel very strongly about that. As a matter of fact, it was one of the most riveting moments of my life. And I think everyone I've ever talked to who's taken that oath in the well of the House or the Senate, which I've had the pleasure to do both, felt the same way. So I think this is a little bit one of those things that doesn't need to be said. I think it's something that we all know, feel, and see, and we live every day. So I'll be voting on and against. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Further discussion on the motion? Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would just throw in for discussion that rather than add a third rule, which just seems to kind of, three things stating roughly the same thing in different ways. Maybe we could just, and this isn't an amendment to this particular proposal, but maybe it come back if it comes on the floor, is just move Rule 10 on procedural authority up front after or before the definitions. I mean, if the desire is truly to just make it obvious to everybody what our guidance is, then take the guidance we've already got that states the Constitution and move it. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not gonna, that's, I think, out of place as an amendment for this, but that would be just discussion on sort of the thought behind the spirit of the amendment.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Yes, President Hostetter.
As a follow-up to Representative Wilson, clarifying that's not an amendment, that's something for a separate and later consideration.
Representative Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, President Dockstetter, I think it might be kind of too different from the amendment on the floor to actually have that as amendment, but I mean, I kind of hesitate to say strike everything in the proposal and make a different thing. So I was just offering that more of as a discussion point, I guess.
Thank you. Further questions, further discussion on the amendment, further discussion on the motion. Further discussion. Sensing you are ready to vote, we're voting on the proposed amendment joint rule 1-3 as an amendment to the joint rules. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, the motion has failed. Thank you, Representative Wharf. I'm sure we'll see it on the floor, probably on both sides, or maybe an alternate. All right. Are there any other amendments for the body to consider, for the group to consider?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We have an amendment to Joint Rule 17.1 and also Appendix A. And I have the sponsor in here, Senator Kinski. And with your permission, we'd refer to him to introduce.
Please, welcome, Senator Kinski. Would you like to explain your amendment? Senator Kinski.
Where'd you go, Senator?
Wasn't with me in cyber hell.
I see him. I got him, but he's not muted. So, Senator Kinski, you can hear us?
We cannot hear you, Senator Kinski. Still no sound yet. It says connecting. Yep.
Move towards the light.
This, for whatever reason, Mr. Co-Chair, if I might say, it was hard to connect to this time. Senator Guru was having the same trouble. It took me several times to connect.
Okay. President Dockstetter, what time are you reconvening in the Senate?
Whenever we're done with this meeting.
We'll let this meeting preside.
I just got out of the hell that Guru was in before me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Senator Kinski, you're invited to explain your amendment to the committee for their consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This rule is an amendment to the Joint Interim Committee rule and a proposed amendment to the Management Council rules. Let me start first with the amendment to the Joint Interim Committee rule. So as you know, when we adopt our permanent rules for each session of the legislature, there's a provision there that says attached as Appendix A is a set of default rules, and unless a committee votes otherwise, those are the rules that govern. And that default set of rules says that a quorum can amend, but it takes a majority of both houses in order to sponsor legislation. And this amendment would simply say that it also takes a majority of both houses both bodies in order to amend any legislation. And the origin of it is at least in my experience, mostly in appropriations, but it could be in other committees as well, where there's a numerical advantage enjoyed by the House. And it happens now and then, often enough to I think be inefficient in terms of legislation, that there will be a 7-5 vote and something goes into a bill that everybody knows is going to come right back out of that bill when it hits to the Senate floor. In fact, that's the first thing the Senate does is strip out all those 7.5s, colloquial referred to sometimes as cram downs, and those get stripped off. And then in the ebb and flow of legislation, those issues end up being resolved in the final hours of the legislature. And I guess, in my view, that's just not the best way to legislate. I think that what this rule says is that if the committee can't agree on default rules, then the default rule will be that you've got to agree on every amendment and the bill. And what that does, at least in the case of appropriations and perhaps other committees as well, I think is good for Wyoming, because it says if you can't agree in committee in December, for crying out loud, why are we going to defer this off until conference committee 2 months later? Sit down, resolve the differences, get a bill that represents a concurrence of both sides. It'll still be subsequently subject to amendment on both floors, but let's at least have our committees kick out a bill that in the final analysis represents the best thinking of both bodies and force people to sit down and agree rather than just a simple override of a 7-5. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is in the same spirit, which is to say that for Management Council, adoption of certain actions, again, requires the concurrence of a majority of both the House and the Senate. And those actions are specifically called out in the first page in 17-1 subsection C. Originally, the proposal was that all Management Council actions would require a concurrence of both bodies, but LSO staff pointed out that I think by their estimate, better than 90% of what Management Council does is perfunctory or ministerial things like approving bills, that sort of thing. And so they forced me to sit down and tease out what are the most consequential things that really should have the concurrence of both the House and the Senate. And those are listed. Amendment 2 or final sponsorship approval of draft legislation, approval of any interim study topic for a joint interim committee, select committee or task force or reassignment of a topic to a different committee, creation of a select committee or task force, adoption of a legislative session calendar or proposed rule change for a legislative session, and adoption or amendment of any policy of the Management Council or to any manuals, handbooks, or similar documents. And I think it's important to keep the spirit of parity between the two bodies, and that's what's embodied in our Constitution. It says the House and the Senate will make their own rules. The Constitution really doesn't provide for joint rules. It provides for each body to separately govern itself by rules. My friend, the late John Patton, the Legislative Service Office and the Management Council was his baby. We had no Legislative Service Office until his legislation, and he wanted it overseen by a bipartisan panel, thus the composition of the Management Council. Over time, more consequential things have come from the Management Council, and I think it's important in the spirit of the Constitution and the best interests of both institutions that anything that's of consequence, such as outlined in 1 through 5, represent a majority of both the House and the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Kinski. So, President Dockstader, would you mind if I just sent out a quick email to both bodies telling that informing them that the Joint Rules Committee continues to meet? We will convene when we've completed our business, and we anticipate 2:30, but we'll update. Is that appropriate for you?
That'd be great. Thank you for doing that.
Yep, it's sent right now. And are there any questions for Senator Kinski? Thank you, Mr. President. Any questions for Senator Kinski?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Senator Kinski, I kind of have a question on the structure of this. So I think there's some really great debate in the Management Council piece that maybe I don't see in the other piece. So my question to you is, why did you roll these all into one when I think it's two very separate ideas and discussions about interim committees versus management council. So that's my question. Why did you roll it into one?
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I think that's just what I ended up with the drafting assistance of LSO. I'm looking at the rule here to see whether it's possible to divide it readily, and it may well be. I'd ask Mr. Obrecht if he might just take a look at that while the discussion continues. If that's of interest, Representative Summers, let's see whether Matt can come up with a ready way to divide the two.
Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I don't always remember all my procedures. Senator Rothfuss would line me out if I got it wrong. But, if we divide, then can you amend the division? That's my question, which I think you could once, right? Yeah. So I believe so. That would be another alternative. So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow through with my thought, I think as it relates to management council sponsoring a bill and adoption of a legislative session calendar or a proposed rule change for a legislative session, I think those absolutely should be both bodies agreeing, right? I mean, that's what we've tried to do all along. But I think those two things in particular, I think in my mind, would be worthy of this majority of both sides. So, Mr. Chairman, that may be where I go, but I'm interested in others.
Thank you very much. So any other questions for clarity on the proposed amendment? Any other questions to the explainer of the amendment? President Dockstader.
Thank you. As far as dividing, I think the concept and what we're trying to accomplish here is a matter for both situations. And we're trying to more or less reach out and create that majority concept. I don't know that dividing them helps. It's all one and the same issue that we're trying to address. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I got Chairman Wilson, Madam Minority Floor Leader, and then Representative Gray. Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, just if you know, I'm trying to read through the rules, but it's kind of hard to get that all done at once. Maybe a refreshment of my memory. If a person is absent, it seems to me that like sometimes their vote counts as a no, but on other occasions, I know if they're sort of absent without leave, I believe on committee, or if they refuse to vote, they're an aye. Do you recall what the current methodology of that is? And I just bring that up because, either from interim or even my time on JAC, with the smaller number from your chamber, someone gets up to make a phone call or go to lunch or whatever, and someone, maybe isn't at the meeting, the numbers fall off really quickly. And so do you recall what the
Appreciate the
position
question.
is for an absent person?
Mr. Co-Chair, I'll refer to staff, but I don't recall anyone missing and how we dealt with it because they were always there for a vote. Staff would like to step in.
Thank you. I think current rule says that unless you're excused for other legislative business, that you are considered an aye vote on any motion that's before the body. Director Obrecht.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we're talking, I think, Representative Wilson, about joint interim committees here, not standing committees of the House or Senate.
Okay, fair
and
enough.
What would be considered a quorum for that? And that's covered in your sample rules attached to the joint rules, and that's what is being amended in this. The only quorum that is necessary to transact business is a majority of the members of the joint committee. So it could be just if there's 14 members, just as long as you have 7 members there or 8 members there, that's a majority of the membership. Doesn't matter what the House makeup of that majority is, they can act on any business. And then the sample rule 2A actually says that less than a quorum can actually meet and conduct business as long as they then pull the other members and get their votes on whatever action was taken.
Thank you very much. Representative Conley and then Representative Gray.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Senate and particularly the Senate sponsor kind of follows from Majority Floor Leader Summers about treating interim committees and management council the same. And in particular, when I was reading it, I was kind of confused about the management council portion because management council is constituted so differently than any other committee, with having an equal number of House and Senate, with the exception of the 13th member who is appointed by the body opposite from the presiding officer. So it seems to me, if you're going back, Senator Kinski, to former Representative Patton's idea of management council, it is very, very different in the way that it's constituted. And that, I think, to him and to the body was very meaningful. And so I'm curious about your thoughts regarding that.
Thank you. Let's get Representative Gray. Any comments from questions from Representative Gray, and then we'll let Senator Kinski kind of clean up a few things.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a question for the majority floor leader. I mean, I just, the concept that management council is somehow, I mean, to me, the premise to this is pretty simple. And I've always kind of taken the position laid out in this rule is that it's two separate bodies. This is not a unicameral legislature like Nebraska. This is bicameral. And so it should have to go through both bodies. And I don't see why management council should be subject to that and an interim committee not. I mean, I think you could take any specific action. Sometimes this will be to someone's benefit. Sometimes it'll be to someone's disadvantage. But I think it's good for us to cover it in one rule because the premise of it is true regardless of the situation. Thank you.
All right, Senator Kinski, anything you want to respond to or can enlighten us on your thoughts for the rule?
Well, my own thought with respect to, I agree wholeheartedly with Representative Gray and Representative Connolly. I wish that John were still with us on Earth. I'd be curious on his view, but there are some actions being taken by Management Council now that are so consequential that I think they're far beyond what I believe the original concept for Management Council was, which was a bipartisan body to oversee a legislative service office, bipartisan because they wanted to make sure that research wasn't skewed and just resources were fairly allocated. But it's over time, it's morphed to where we saw things like a task force bill that was passed by the House and died overwhelmingly in the Senate upon adjournment was reconstituted by the Management Council. And those sort of things go noticed by the membership. And I think it's important that we protect carefully the bipartisan nature and the bicameral nature of the Management Council to avoid over time people regarding it as just another sort of partisan legislation by another means, so to speak. And so I think restoring the bicameral nature to any consequential action that comes out of it is important in the long run for the legislature, the state, and for our process. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. I see Representative Yin has a query and then Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a question for the sponsor or maybe LSO if they know this offhand. Are the numbers of members on each chamber's interim committee membership set in statute, or is that set just by the presiding officer, or is that set in rules? Could the Senate, for example, decide that they wanted to have more members to meet an equal number of members with the House? Thank you, Mr.
So I'll just respond to that. The House rules sets the number of members on each of our standing committees, and I'm going to presume that the Senate does as well. Director Obrecht, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Yep. So by rule, the membership of our 12 standing committees is set, the House and the Senate. I hope that clears that up. Representative McGuire.
As a bit of a comment, I'm looking at section 658 of Mason's voting in joint committees. And it says historically, the committee members vote individually and not by house when voting in joint committee. But then it goes on to say, in more modern practice for voting in joint committee, the members vote by houses, a quorum being present. So I guess that the reason that I bring that up is the question that I have is, and I think I know the answer myself, at some point, is it important to have a bicameral committee and work through an issue? On the other hand, is it more appropriate, and maybe that would be management council, to have individual houses represented and their votes counted that way? I think that there are values either way, and it's a balancing act. And obviously, looking at Masons, this question has come up many times in the past, and there have been different answers. And so I just point that out, that it's not a new question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Any more questions for the presenter? Questions for the presenter? Yes, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My question's more for Matt Obrick maybe than the presenter, and that is, current system we have now, how long has it been in place, particularly the interim committee one, and maybe speak to management council too. So when was the last time this rule was amended appreciably, I guess, or something?
Dr. Obrick.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, that's a good question on the rule and when the last time it had been amended. It has not been amended within my tenure at LSO the last 15 years. And I asked my immediate predecessor, who was here 15 years before me, and he doesn't remember it being amended before that those rules had been in place through his memory as well. As far as management council, those provisions in management council of membership and what it takes to for an action in management council haven't changed since 1973. Now, to Senator Kinski's point, there likely have been in that time additional duties assigned to management council through statute.
Just to be clear, those management council's duties are Title 28, correct? Not rules.
Mr. Chairman, 28.8.101 is where they start.
Thank you very much. Representative Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious about the frequency of these so-called cram down votes. Are these things that happen fairly regularly? I try to remember one in my brief tenure where joint judiciary had a bill that was only voted on by in support of by the House members and forced down. So maybe it happens more often than I think it does, but I don't recall it happening all that often.
Thank you. I think part of the earlier testimony was JAC sees it more as amendments. But go ahead. I see that President Dockstader and
I just would add that depends on what side of the cram down you're on. I feel like I've been a part of it for a long time and experienced a lot of it.
I thought you were a House member at one time on the winning team. All right. Thank you very much.
I was there.
Senator Hicks. And then we'll get to you, Senator Kinski. Senator Hicks?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Any response from you, Senator Kinski?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, quite a few of those piled up, so I'd like to address them. Representative
Yes,
McGuire, good catch in Masons. I saw that one as well. It's true that the newer practice being that you look to a majority of both bodies, and perhaps for some of the reasons that I've discussed here. The bicameral nature of it, I think what's interesting about Wyoming as compared to others is not only are we a bicameral legislature, but there's nothing in the Constitution that contemplates the creation of a unicameral body like the Management Council. And so I think it's important that we understand that the Management Council's scope and focus should be, as I think John Patton anticipated originally, it's to oversee this administrative agency in a bipartisan fashion. So the idea of reassigning committee work, when you look at the statute, it says if a committee's not doing its assigned work, which is pretty dramatic if you think about it. You know, a committee's got a topic and it's just not pursuing it. You'll see an emphasis on allocation of resources. So the original scheme contemplated that your judiciary chairs get together and they decide what their interim topics are going to be, but they need studies. And so the statute talks about Management Council being the central switchboard that makes sure that 12 standing committees aren't demanding too much resource from the Legislative Service Office. We have the smallest Legislative Service Office of the 50 states, is my understanding. So it's an extraordinary body to say we're going to create this Management Council that's constituted of two houses, when the Constitution says the House will set its rules and the Senate will set its rules. So to have a body that says, well, we're just going to create a task force that was voted down by the Senate is a pretty extraordinary thing when you think about it. So for it to work, it depends upon both bodies recognizing that it's a fair, objective, nonpartisan process. And so that then brings me to Representative Washett's question: how often? It ebbs and flows. It depends. Management Council, Appropriations Committee this time around, it was not a love fest, but we've got a list of some cram downs, but nothing like what's happened before. Everybody's determined that we're going to get along and get along well. And so there's an ebb and flow there, but there was still, some of those where, gotcha, here we go, 7-5. And, those won't be resolved until the very end of the process. So then that segues, I think, well into Representative Summers' concern, or his question about when were the last time these rules were amended. It's not a matter of that the rules have been changed in such a way that's changed the process. I've talked to some of the Senate elders, and I said, when did this all change? Well, they can name, speakers and presidents over time that assumed more and more and more authority under the auspices of the Management Council. And that it's just been a slow, steady creep over time. And so I don't know about the House, but, on the Senate side, people hear, well, Management Council's decided this. You're already down quite a few votes as to whatever it is, because there's some chafing at how far Management Council has gone, and I think that's a concern that should be shared on both sides of the body. When a bill is struck down and then reconstituted out of whole cloth at a Management Council meeting after adjournment, that should be of concern to all of us in terms of the integrity of the institution, those kinds of things. So with changes in leadership, perhaps that creeping encroachment of the Management Council will recede. But I think it's important to get it baked into the rules to restore the bipartisan, bicameral nature of the Business Council, at least on these 5 very consequential things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any further questions for the bringer of the rule? Any further questions for the bringer of the rule? All right. Seeing none, Rules Committee, what's your pleasure? What's your pleasure?
Move the rule.
Okay.
Second.
Moved by Dockstader, second by
Driscoll.
Driscoll. All right. Thank you. Sorry, you changed screens on me. You got your own. All right. We're on the rule. Discussion on the rule. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I want to come at this from just a little bit of a different angle, and I just want everybody to contemplate this. And I want to talk about when those occasions occur. And I have served on committees, joint interim committees, where there was a 7-9 or a 5-9 vote. It does happen. And I've also served on committees where we've made sure that didn't happen, and we've adopted the rules that said that it has to be a majority of both houses to move a bill. But I want to talk about the cost of governance when we don't do that and the impact of the people that we're down here to serve. And so in that light, let me just give you a couple examples. When that happens in an interim committee, and then we end up with a bill that has already been established, that the one interim committee, one standing committee is a solid no on, and the other one's a solid yes. But if it passes out and becomes a bill in the legislature, it's typically assigned, always assigned, to the committee that had the prevailing vote. Under that case, we know as legislators that when that is reassigned to the other side, it is not going to pass out of that committee. I've never seen a case where that didn't happen. So what does that do as far as to the people of the state of Wyoming that have a vested interest in that issue? So they drive from all over the state of Wyoming to come down and testify on the one house or the one that really wanted that piece of legislation. And we've used staff time, we've used personal time of people to come and try to participate in the process, and we've set up a false expectation for those people that we were elected to serve to drive from all over the state to come down and testify, use their time, their treasure, their money to rent motels on a piece of legislation that's not going to pass. I think that's a tremendous disservice for the people that elected us to office. That's one perspective. On the other perspective, particularly dealing with the budget when we get those disparities in votes from one house to another. So let's talk about what that takes in staff time, takes in legislative time, and again, are we serving the people of the state of Wyoming well? That we pass that budget out, one house goes down to the other end and the other one comes down, and the first thing they do, they amend all that stuff out. The other side amends it up, and we have these giant protracted discussions. In the meantime, we're just eating up staff time after staff time after staff time. When all of this could have been resolved had we just sit down and come to the exact same place where we usually end up, which was a reasonable compromise between both houses and a conference committee. Why would we govern in a fashion that we drive the cost of government up? Because we're unable to reconcile our differences in the joint committees at that time. So, Mr. Chairman, I look at it as an inefficient, costly, inappropriate way to govern, and I don't think we serve the people of the state of Wyoming well by doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment as moved? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple things I wanted to say. One is on the standing committees. We did in the Joint Judiciary Committee in 2019, actually have a rule in place that had pieces of legislation have to go through both bodies in order to have final passage. And I just want to say from that experience that it worked really well. I know it happens pretty rarely. At this point, it has to be the committee to decide that. It worked really well. And I think both sides were really happy with it. The other thing I want to emphasize is, there's a lot of discussion about this only helping the House as currently written. There's one committee, I was looking at the makeup, the Education Committee. It's actually kind of interesting. It would probably be an advantage to the House position for them to vote jointly, because on funding issues, it would require probably 3 swings voting jointly, as opposed to the way this rule would be written would really only require 2 swings. That maybe doesn't happen that often, but I was looking at the Education Committee and I was kind of like, well, that's an interesting anomaly in terms of the makeup. So I think this emphasis that this is only helping the House position is not necessarily true. It depends on the situation. And at the end of the day, I think we should remove all those concerns and go back to the principle here, which is that this is a bicameral legislature. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but it is a bicameral legislature, and we should be voting as separate bodies. when we're meeting jointly for final passage of bills. So thank you for the discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Senator Grew, and then Representative Greer, and then Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, on and for, I too, look at this, and I've been on both sides once again, and I do remember once again back to my House days when the Speaker used to say, "You honor the institution, and trust the process." And I do trust the process, and I do honor the institution, but I've seen it, like I say, both ways, and I've sat through a lot of meetings. And going back to what Senator Kinski, I think his intent when he brought this up, I think all we're saying is that maybe while we honor the institution and trust the process, maybe there isn't a way we make the process a little bit better. And try to make it so we can reach decisions in a more collegial way on the front end rather than the way we do it now, especially in JEC, where it seems to be with a gun at our head at the last minute while everyone is sitting in each body shooting rubber bands across the room and waiting until the 10th, 11th, and 12th hours for us to try to see who's going to cave first, to try to actually work it out a different way. And that's what this is all about. On and for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Greer, Madam Minority Floor Leader Conley, and then Representative Olson.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker. I've heard this discussion over and over again over the years, and it's a result of a couple personalities. I think what we've had in place works well. And I just seen as a chairman numerous times a handful of House members would vote with the senators that kept a bill moving forward, that I had more opportunity to work with my House members, and we passed some good legislation. I just have this strong feeling that interim committees ought to work as a group. I realize everybody talks about the bicameral nature, but interim committees are a different animal. And they're an animal where we're reaching out as a legislature. And the people are sitting there testifying and coming forward, don't care if your name's senator or if your name's representative. That we're just there to flesh out ideas and hear what the people want to hear and try to get those ideas put together in a package that could come to the legislature to then be worked through the bicameral process. And in my opinion, this proposed rule just gets in the way of that.
Thank you. Madam Minority Floor Leader Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the proposed amendment. First I'll go back to, I think it's very different talking about an interim committee and management council. The way that management council is constituted is wholly different than our standing committees when they're working together as interim committees, and was designed for a very, very different method of deliberation. But that being said, my next point, I agree with Representative Greer. I'm sorry, with Representative Greer. I got my wrong G's. With Representative Greer, and honestly, Senator Hicks, I disagree with your characterization of moving from an interim committee to a standing committee, to moving from our interim work, that kind of intensive days of work, working together, to going to the floor. I honestly think about what happened in the interim committee. I take lots of notes. I think about the different positions, whether I won or lost on that vote, and I change. And so the characterization that it would be a waste of time to rehear a bill that had a particular vote in the interim, I would say is not true. It's certainly not true for the way that I think about issues, and I think many other people on committees as well. We look at our interim committee work, that intense kind of study, and we rethink that debate when we go to standing committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't make these comments that I'm about to make because I believe that in making them, I'll change the minds of anyone on this committee. I think most, if not everyone on this committee, probably knows how they're going to vote, but I say them because I think it's appropriate for me to explain why I'll vote the way I'll vote, which is I'm going to vote against this proposal. And I think I take to heart the comments by Senator Hicks about individuals who travel across the state to testify. And when what they have built an expectation of what will come from the legislative process doesn't come to fruition for them, that's probably it's disheartening. I'm sure it is to them. But our job can't be in any way to create a process that guarantees outcomes or results for those individuals. It can be just as frustrating for that individual to have an idea sparked and given to a representative or a senator and carried through a 60-day legislative session and placed on the desk of a governor and vetoed. I mean, that is a process. There are checks and there are balances and there are processes. Fundamentally, there is a reason why this is designed the way it is. And I think it goes very deep into the philosophical principles of proportional voting versus majoritarian voting. The House and the Senate are not equal bodies. They're not. There's 60 members in one and 30 in another. They have different constitutional duties. The House is charged with the constitutional responsibility of bringing a measure that may raise revenue. The Senate cannot. If an individual from Wyoming wants to raise revenue, they can't go to a senator and ask to propose a bill. It's not possible. It's not constitutionally possible. Any more than they can ask me as a representative to confirm certain appointments that only the Senate confirms. They're different bodies, very different, and they're based on proportionality. That's why there are more members in the House than there are in the Senate, and that's why that same principle carries forward on certain committees. And that's why it's important to keep the vote structured that way, because it's not a majoritarian vote on, say, appropriations where we're discussing these amendments. It's designed to be proportional because it's designed to carry that principle forward. So for me, that's an important principle that's rooted in the system of when we speak of bicameralism, we speak of two very different bodies, the House and the Senate. If we are to maintain bicameralism, we have to maintain what is different between the Senate and what is different between the House. They have very different constitutional roles. I think it's important to maintain proportionality voting. I oppose majoritarian style voting when we're talking about the bodies crossing votes. So I think, interestingly, the second half of this proposal, I can't speak a lot to because I don't serve on management council. But I think I'd be more inclined to entertain some of those ideas. But as far as the overall I would almost call it a drastic change to what has been working in the time that I've been here. But more importantly, it seems to philosophically, it makes sense that it's designed the way it is. So I don't think I could in good conscience vote for this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, I guess when I've served on committees, and I think Senator Kinski can attest, I want to make sure we do things together. And I think it's incumbent upon each chairman to make sure that happens. So on the joint committee stuff, I don't support this. I do more than just support all of what the management council piece is. I worry about that you've brought that piece. So that concerns me that we need to do something there. And I don't know whether it's in statute or whether it's in rule, because there's obviously no rules if you're creating rules now for management council. And so there's no way in effect that that you could make that decision on how to vote. If we're having slam downs on, and I've only served on management council a fairly short amount of time, but I've never really noticed slam downs on assignment of interim topics and things like that. I think that's more about whether we're rural and city and west, east side of the state. I don't see it, but if that's going on, then I think we need to take a look statutorily you know, and Senator Kinski, I'd work with you on that if that's something you want to do. I'm concerned if we are breaking down at the management council level, and there is a feeling that one side or the other is making it, you know, having its way, because I don't like that, and particularly on the issue of the session schedule, that cannot be one body determines that. And we haven't done it that way, but so I'm not going to support this, but I think on the management council piece, I would agree there needs to be probably something done there.
Chairman Dockstader.
Thank you.
President.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Appreciate the discussion and what has been said. I just would note on the management council that it does need to be revisited, folks. So you got a bill that we've killed on the floor and you bring it back through as a management council bill, and here it is completely dead in the process, and it's brought back and reconsidered through management council. That's simply not right. Yes, we need to reconsider. There's a reason. There's a reason you keep seeing this and it keeps coming back, and we're addressing it here again, and we'll address it again if we don't get it. We'll bring it back up in some form or fashion. Problem persists, folks. It's not going away. Regardless of if your name's representative, your name's senator, they know the difference. Well, one still gets more control in the vote. We need to go back and take a look at this again. As far as proportionality, one person represents 9,000 people, the other person represents 18,000 people, but we're not seeing it in the final outcome. I'm in full support of this change in the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Representative Gray, you have your hand up? Oh, sorry. I'll go Representative Gray and then I'll go Senator Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, you know, the other reason I think it is a good idea to adopt this rule, I kind of learned this on this management audit rule I've been trying to bring. The makeup of the standing committees is laid out in rule. So, I mean, all the Senate has to do is increase the number of members on each standing committee, and they could, in theory, even outvote the House. And so, I mean, there's a structural problem here, and at the end of the day, it is a bicameral process. So, I'd urge an aye vote on this. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of points, and not to belabor this issue or be argumentative, but the example I give, and I think it gets to what some of Representative Olson's discussion was, is you know, that guarantee an outcome. But when you have two bodies that have completely voted the opposite direction, you've guaranteed the outcome of that legislation when it gets down here. It's going nowhere. That is a guarantee. When one committee is 100% against it and the other one's for it, that's a guaranteed outcome. So that's what happens when that happens in those standing committees. And as far as the majoritarian rule issue, I don't know. The last time I looked under Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, we don't have a majority a form of government. That's not the way we have it. It's a Republican form of government of elected officials in a bipartisan body or bicameral body. It's not by majority or majoritarian rule. That's a process we use to elect representatives. So, Mr. Chairman, again, whether you are for or against it, I think what this more than anything illustrates is that we've got an issue out there that at some point in time we need to come to recollection of how we're going to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Members, any further discussion? So I'm going to make just a couple of comments.
Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, Representative Driscoll, sorry.
Hiding from you. I'm not going to add a whole lot more. We've covered a lot of ground. The one thing that there's a perception that it's not there. Blatantly, it is there. For those of us that have been on the backside of it, we know it. We've kept track of it through different times. Probably most apparent on appropriations, but if you want to really take it to a base level, let's go back one biennium when there was an encouragement whether the bodies voted jointly or separately. And we actually, the committees I was on, we got the cram down put on us. The House had asked them to keep it where we voted jointly, and that's why it went. And it really does quell your feeling of being able to control your body. for me, anybody that's got an issue of fairness is both bodies are equal bodies. And you can argue any reason you want for it to be unfair, but fairness is fairness. These are designed by the Constitution to be equal bodies. The Constitution did not specify for them to be unequal bodies. So I think it's just very important that we look long-term at going back to where the bodies really truly are equal bodies with each other. And does that create some problems at times? Absolutely. You butt heads. We get to see that in conference committees. Does it long-term make governing easier? And the answer is yes, because you don't get games played on how you get around one body having an upper hand over the other one. So I strongly encourage a yes vote.
Thank you. Further comments, further discussion? Further discussion. So Mr. Obrecht, would you comment on the way Management Council joint rules would go forth with a recommendation out of this? Because it sounds like to me, we're going to have two different houses voting two different ways on this. And it looks like we could end up with maybe a rule on one side and not the same rule on the other side. And so how would that be rectified in a joint rule? Thank you, Mr. Director Obrecht.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question. What'll happen is if the two bodies can't come to consensus on a joint rule, there simply won't be a joint rule on that topic. So what we would then do in determining what procedure to follow, or what would be LSO's recommendation for procedure to follow, you'd fall back on other authorities. You'd fall back on statute, Masons, and historic practice of the legislature to determine, say, the quorum in a joint interim committee and what's necessary for vote to conduct business in that committee.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Director Obrecht?
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, just let me clarify, if the Management Council rule wasn't to pass, you've got a statute clearly on point on what it takes to conduct business within Management Council. And that's just a majority vote of all members appointed.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was going to make a couple of comments. I think that if this were just the joint interim committee rule, I would be amicable to moving that forward. I also make a secondary commitment that I will visit with the House chairman that we honor that type of principle as we go forward into our interim. They at least take it to the body, to their members and House members, and have that considered. The second one is on the second comment I make is on Management Council. And actually I visited quite extensively with Director Obrecht. There's quite a bit of Title 28 that needs to be revisited, including Management Council. And I'll be glad to work with my Senate colleagues to try to better define what we think limitations to what Management Council, if that is appropriate, or other sideboards, if you will. So I'm going to vote against this motion, but it's not because I don't recognize there are still opportunities before us to address this. And as a presiding officer, I will do my share on the House side, both in the potential statutory changes for Management Council and with the way our House committees have the opportunity to conduct themselves. Any other comments from any other members? Comments from any other members? Representative Jennings, you got your hand up? Okay, sorry. I could see your hand. Thank you. Any other comments from members? All right. I think we'll just take a hand vote. Do we want to do this by House, by chamber, or what is the current practice of that, Director Obrecht? Just a majority of all the members.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's my reading of Rule 11-3 of the joint rules. It's a majority of both members, but I would caution, like with anything, the separate rules committees will then be free to bring back whatever rule they want to their chambers.
Sure, and we recognize that. Thank you. We recognize that. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the proposed joint rule, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I see 7. All those opposed? All right, the rule has failed. There are further rules for our consideration. Thank you, Senator Kinski. And as I mentioned earlier, I am open to working with this, continue working on this in another venue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the Rules Committee.
Any further rules for the committee to amendments to the rules? So we're back on the rule to recommend our motion. The motion on the floor is to recommend the adoption of the temporary joint rules as the permanent rules of the 66th legislature. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. All those opposed? Actually, on this one, should we take a roll call vote? Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, let's do that.
Okay, Ms. Landry, would you take a roll call vote for the House and then Ms. Parks for the Senate? Ms. Landry?
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Connolly.
Aye.
Representative Gray.
Aye.
Representative Greer.
Aye.
Representative Jennings.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Olson.
Aye.
Representative Summers.
Aye.
Representative Washut.
Aye.
Representative Wilson.
Aye.
Representative Yin.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer.
Aye.
And Mr. Speaker Barlow.
Aye.
13
Miss-
aye.
Thank you. Ms. Parks, before you begin, President Dockstetter, could I send out a message to your members and my members we'll convene at 3 o'clock? Would that work for
Please
you?
do. Thank you for your help.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Parks, thank you.
Senator Driscoll.
Aye.
Senator Garreau.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Dockstetter.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Thank you. The motion has been adopted by both houses unanimously. Thank you very much. President Dockstetter, anything we want to?
No, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Appreciate everybody's time and consideration.
All right. There's more work to do. We look forward to this afternoon finishing up our work. President, how long do you think you have on to go this afternoon?
Mr. Floor Leader, what were you estimating when we spoke?
I think less than 30 minutes. We just got to read in whatever bills come from the House and assign committees. I believe that's only